So today I'm going to be talking about the sorry state of medical freedom for California students. So this is me. This is my kidnapper throwing me out the window after hearing me talk about vaccines for 5 hours. Yeah, that's me. That's one of my favorite cartoons ever. It's done by my friend Dr. Shannon Kroner. So I'm going to tell you a story about what's happening in California now. This is a plaintiff of ours, and I have to call her Susan because there's so much pressure to vaccinate in California that people cannot be identified. So she's a plaintiff on our lawsuit on behalf of her son, and they are not identified in our lawsuit. They're only identified by their initials because it's such a bad situation in California. Susan was gravely vaccine injured when she was growing up. She had failure to thrive, so she's about this tall. She has scoliosis. You know what she taught me? Do you remember when we all had to go in 7th grade, maybe people around my age, I'm around 60 now, you had to bend over in gym class to check for scoliosis? That was due to the oral polio vaccine causing scoliosis. And now there are no gym class checks for scoliosis because it's not happening anymore. Isn't that wild? So she was gravely vaccine injured. She did not want her child to be as injured as she was, so she had a medical exemption from vaccines in California, and that got her child to school. Well, what happened is the Department of Public Health sent these what I call goon squads around to all the schools in California, and they started pulling valid medical exemptions from children who needed them to attend school. So then what they did with this woman, I created this image to show what happened. This is the DA, and she tried to take her child to school 3 times, witnessed and recorded. They kicked her and her child out every single time, and then the DA accused her of truancy. Truancy is a misdemeanor that, if convicted, carries a 6-month jail time. So this is what's going on in California. This is an extreme example, but this is what's going on in California. This cannot stand. You're wondering, hey, Alex, I know you're an anti-vaxxer, but what's the problem with vaccines? Aren't they good? Well, I'm going to go into an example of the measles vaccine, and trust me, this is very related to what's going on in California. It's not a non sequitur, I promise. So first of all, here's a chart of deaths per 100,000 people from measles. This is from our US Bureau of Vital Statistics. And you can see when the measles vaccine was introduced in 1963, that the rate of death from measles had come down to 1 in 400,000 people. Does that sound like a deadly illness to you? Well, they didn't think so at the time either. So here's the guy who wanted to develop the vaccine for measles. And he wrote an article called The Importance of Measles as a Health Problem. It doesn't say deadly health problem. And he's the founder of the CDC's Epidemic Intelligence Services, otherwise known as EIS. Does anybody know what that is? That's the CIA of the CDC. This is the deep state right here. And so in the 60s, he was the chief promoter of the measles vaccine. And so people would ask him, because measles is so mild, why did you want to develop a measles vaccine? Why do we need a vaccine for an infection that's not deadly? And he said, I reply with the same answer that Hillary used when asked why he wished to climb Mount Everest. He said, because it is there. To this it may be added, and it can be done. He didn't say anything about solving an issue with measles deaths, did he? So it was mild at the time, and the data prove it. Now, here's another problem with the measles vaccine. This is a guy named Dr. Gregory Poland. He was the chief vaccinologist at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester for a long time, and now he's an emeritus vaccinologist. He became obsessed with a problem with the measles vaccine. You know what that is? You can get vaccinated with the measles vaccine, but 20 years later, 40 years later, you won't have any immunity to it anymore. And so I'm going to show you just a little screenshot of one of his studies where he says this is a highly vaccinated population that he studied of about 1,400 adults. They're 20 to 44 years old. And he showed that a non-trivial portion of this group that was highly vaccinated, in other words, 38% of them, had no evidence of measles antibodies, like they'd never been vaccinated in their lives, like they'd never had measles in their lives. What does that mean? Can we blame the anti-vaxxers for measles outbreaks? Yes or no? No. No, you cannot blame anti-vaxxers for measles outbreaks. Do you know the percent of people in the United States who are actually fully unvaccinated? Does anybody know? 1/4%.
I'm one of
them. Congratulations. Is anybody here openly admitting to being an anti-vaxxer?
Oh, yeah.
Very few. Okay, well, just stay with me. Stay with me. It's a badge of honor. Okay, measles has been, quote unquote, eliminated. It hasn't been eradicated. They consider it eliminated. And this, people, is elimination of measles. You get cases every year. Here's 2010, 2012, 2014, 2018, 2019, 2025. Seems like a lot, right? For an illness that's supposed to be eliminated. But this is what elimination means. You get cycles of an illness again and again and again every few years. Because there is no such thing as herd immunity. It's a term from the animal kingdom where it meant that an infection would go through the younger animals every 3 years or so. But there's no herd immunity you can achieve from vaccination. Obviously, if the vaccine wears off so often in a highly vaccinated population, there's no way you're ever going to get herd immunity. So, okay, so this might seem kind of alarming to people that there were 2,200 cases in 2025 and about as many in 2026. But you're saying, well, you know, we're the most vaccinated country in the world. Of course we're going to have low rates of measles, and it's a real big problem that we have these outbreaks. Well, let me tell you, actually, we're not the most vaccinated country in the world. We're about average. So here we are, the United States, we have about a 92% vaccination rate for measles vaccine, but all these countries up here, they have much higher vaccination rates than the United States does. So when you try to tell me that we're the most vaccinated country in the world, so we should have no measles, that's not true. But let me show you some more perspective here. These are the red lines. That's the year 2000 to 2025. The bottom of the scale is 0 cases. The top is 1 million cases. And so the red lines are the annual non-US measles cases around the world. You can see there were almost 1 million cases around the world in 2019. And how many did we have in 2019? A few hundred? So the blue, do you see the blue bars? Exactly, no blue bars. The blue bars that don't exist are the United States measles cases on an annual basis compared to the global cases. So let me just tell you in numbers how much better we're doing than expected. The US population is 4.2% of the world's population. So if we have average measles vaccination rates, we should carry about 4.2% of the measles cases, right? Well, we don't. So I did a calculation, and our average share of measles cases in the world since the year 2000, this is all the years averaged together, is 0.06%. So 0.06% of the measles cases are in the United States. So even if we had thousands more cases of measles in the United States, we'd still be doing far better than expected. And so again, a little bit more math. If you take this and divide it by 0.06, we're doing 71 times better than expected with measles. So it's not a problem in the United States. Okay, final problem, well, second to final problem with measles vaccines. Here is another chart. These are raw numbers, so this axis goes 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. That's the number of deaths reported after measles vaccine by year. And the chart starts here in 1982 and takes us to the present time. And you'll see that in total, over all those years, there have been 302 deaths reported after measles vaccine. However, that's a low number because this is just the tip of the iceberg of what happens after vaccination. The underreporting factor for this database, which is called the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, is 7.7 to 40. So we're actually talking about 2,000 to 12,000 deaths after measles vaccine that probably happened. 2,000 to 12,000 deaths after measles vaccine. How many deaths from measles do you think we've had in the same period? Any guesses? Okay, 0, 5. Okay, it's actually a little more than that. But in that same period I put here in red, the deaths reported after somebody had measles. There was a big measles outbreak in 1989, 1990, 1991. That resulted in 123 deaths. But 2015, there was 1 death, and they claimed 3 deaths in 2025. 2 of those deaths were the 2 girls, the Mennonite girls in West Texas. Does anybody remember that? Okay, their families and the doctors who reviewed their charts say they absolutely did not die of measles. They died of medical mismanagement. So there would really only be 1 death in 2025. Anyway, the bottom line is, not even including the underreporting factor for measles vaccine deaths, compared to deaths after measles, we have a big problem here. The vaccine is causing more deaths by far than the measles. And there's no underreporting factor for deaths after measles. Remember, there's an underreporting factor for the measles vaccine deaths. So we're talking 2 to 12,000 real-life deaths from measles vaccine compared to 127 deaths after measles. Cost benefit. Who's doing the calculation? Oh, and there was a study done on this. After I made these charts and started presenting this presentation a year and a half ago, Dr. Nicholas Hulsher, Dr. McCullough, and I think Christine Cosgrove, they did a study showing that you are 2,600 times more likely to die after a measles vaccine than you are after getting a case of measles. Real study. Okay, just ask me, why am I obsessed with measles?
Why are you obsessed with measles?
Thank you, John. Well, I'm going to tell you, because now this is where the Easter eggs really start to come in. First of all, I want to start with this slide. I found this one finally last night. I knew that measles was not seasonal, but now I found it on the CDC's website. Here's CDC. It's this page. July 2nd, 2020 was the time this was updated, or is that 2026? Probably 2026. I can't really see it. But I just got this slide last night. Measles is not a seasonal virus. Got it? Measles is not a seasonal virus. So what is it? Is it a tool of political corruption? Maybe. Let me show you this chart. I'm very proud of this one. The blue bars, these are weekly measles cases starting in January 2025, and then over here it switches to 2026. And what happened, measles is not seasonal, remember? But maybe it's political. Stay with me. You don't have to agree with me, but let me just show you what's going on over here. So the weekly measles cases started here in late January when there were Senate hearings for RFK Jr. on January 29th and 30th. And then RFK Jr. was confirmed to HHS Secretary on February 13th, 2025. And the measles cases just keep going up and up and up. And then they announced the first death of the girl in West Texas. And that creates a spike in these weekly measles cases also around that same time. And then there's the second death of a girl in West Texas. And RFK Jr. knows the doctors who are reviewing her charts, and he knows that these were not deaths from measles, but due to hospital mismanagement, as I said before. He catches on, he knows what they're up to, and I didn't talk to him about this, but I'm defending him with what he had to do. So what he did after that second death that was not from measles in the West Texas hospital, he comes to the funeral of the second girl who died, and he has a press conference, and you know what he did? He said the phrase they wanted him to say since he took office. He'd been resisting it. The phrase was the MMR vaccine is the best way to prevent measles, and he refused to say it all this time until he saw what they were doing with the deaths manufactured in the West Texas hospitals. Sick. It's so sick. So then we get to 2026, and here's January 5th, and the CDC reduces the vaccine schedule from 17 vaccines to 11 vaccines. Oh my gosh, surprise, surprise, the measles cases go up again. And remember, measles is not seasonal. You saw it on the CDC website. Measles is not seasonal. It has not been seasonal since we rolled out the measles vaccine. So then the cases keep going here, and they're getting really nervous around February and early March. You know why? Because there's something called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. They were going to meet and make public and put on the public record for the first time that the COVID shots were dangerous and killing people. And so something happened behind the scenes with a guy named Judge Murphy in the Second Circuit Court, and he disbanded the committee and prevented them from meeting. And to this day, that committee has still not met. And so the deep state, or whoever's in charge of measles cases, I'm going to say that, was relieved, and then boom, they just drop off and go away for the year. And measles is not seasonal. Is it political? Let me show you a couple more examples. If you're not convinced yet, let me show. 2019, measles outbreak, Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, Vancouver. Here's a whistleblower, okay? If you're not convinced that measles is political, this might change your mind. So this is my friend JB Hanley. This is his blog on Substack, and the title is Whistleblower, Measles Outbreak Faked by Pacific Northwest Health Officials in 2019. You know what happened in Washington State in 2019? They introduced a bill to force the MMR vaccine onto all students right after this measles outbreak was announced. But here's what happened. So the guy writes, JB Hanley, and he says, the 2019 measles outbreak in Vancouver, Portland was fake. They made it up in order to change Washington's law. I tried testing the strain against that database and nothing came up. The strain they said was circulating wasn't in the database. So he asked his boss why that was, and his boss froze. That's not good. Somebody knew. He knew. And then he found memos that they were contracting with a PR firm to promote the fake outbreak in order to pass the bill. If you're not convinced measles is political yet, let me give you one more example. This is probably the best proof so far. Let's go to California. So what does this have to do with California students, you're asking? Well, let's look at the Disneyland outbreak from 2014. So this is the Wikipedia page, and this is what the page was until about a week ago, and I'm going to show you what they changed it to. This is funny. So they have a picture of a young boy with measles, and they label it Disneyland Measles Outbreak. This is the Disneyland measles outbreak in 2014. What happened in January 2015? California legislators dropped a bill to take vaccination rights away from parents, to remove the personal belief exemption from vaccination in 2015. Let's take just a little bit closer look at this child. That looks like measles, right? It's a measles rash, but there's something wrong with his arm over there. Let's see what else can look like measles. Oh, let me just take, I forgot I put this in here. This is a new Easter egg right here. So this is a study conducted in 2019, and we've always assumed that that rash you just saw is 100% diagnostic for measles, right? We've always assumed that. Well, these Japanese researchers said, hey, but nobody's ever tested that. So they took a bunch of people who had that rash and they tested them for measles. And guess what? Only 28% of the people with that rash had measles. The measles rash is not diagnostic for measles. When you have a rash on your skin, that's because you're detoxing. It's because your organs of elimination, your liver and your kidneys are overwhelmed. That's what creates rashes. And a measles rash that looks like measles is not measles 72% of the time, according to the study. Nobody else has studied it so far, so that stands. So we look closer at this boy again. Turns out he's one of the 72% who has a measles rash, but he doesn't have measles. This is a smallpox vaccine reaction, and they were passing off a picture of a 1968 image with the face and back of a young child after receiving a smallpox vaccination, and he's having a reaction to the smallpox vaccine. That was their illustration of the Disneyland measles outbreak in California in 2014. Now, I think they saw my presentation because they changed it. They finally have a picture of a kid with measles now. Maybe, 72% chance that's not measles, and he's just detoxing and he has a rash, right? Congratulations. Thank you very much. I changed Wikipedia, woo. Okay, so in 2015, as I said, we lost the personal belief exemption. I used to be able to turn over a blue card for my kids and just say, no, thank you, I'm exercising my personal belief exemption. I do not want my children to have vaccines. I knew at that point that I'd been vaccine injured and I had stopped vaccinating my twins. They're now 24 years old. So, and then 2019 comes along, and the legislators come back again and hammer on the parents of California, and the only exemption left from vaccination to go to school was a medical exemption, and they took it away. Now, mind you, there is medical exemption law on the books in California, but this is a designed to fail medical exemption scheme. It doesn't result in any medical exemptions that children can go to school with. This is what it looks like now. I labeled these are all the different, this is the card that the school administrators have to fill out actually by hand or on the computer. There's polio vaccine, DTP, MMR, Haemophilus influenza, HIV, hepatitis B, and chickenpox vaccine, and then another dose of tetanus for 7th grade entry. So in all, I counted them up. See the numbers here? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then DTAP. This is diphtheria, tetanus, acellular pertussis. That's 3 doses, 3 doses, 3 doses, 3 doses, 3 doses, 5 times. And then they needed a 6th time right before 7th grade, because that's not enough vaccination for a child. They need 6 doses of DTP. And same with MMR. That's 3 measles, mumps, rubella. So that's the 20th, 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, 24th, 25th dose, and all the way up to 35 doses of 10 vaccines just to go to school in California. If you're missing even one of these doses for your child cannot go to school in California, and that's public school and private school. you're left with homeschooling or leaving the state. Is this a problem or what? It's a huge problem. And look at the form that the administrators have to fill out. There is nowhere on here to say somebody has a permanent medical exemption, but that's the law, that you should be able to get a permanent medical exemption, but on the form, there's nothing here. This says requires follow-up. Temporary medical exemption, missing doses are overdue, follow-up. I mean, there's nothing on here for a permanent medical exemption. The only way they can check a permanent medical exemption is if somebody is in special ed, is an independent study, or is homeschooled. There is no option for a permanent medical exemption anywhere on here. Nowhere. What about the kids who have autoimmune disease, allergies, asthma? That's all caused by vaccination, hands down. There are 13 studies now showing that those conditions are so much more prevalent in the vaccinated than the unvaccinated. There's even a study showing that if your child is vaccinated, he or she sees the pediatrician 25 times more often for fever than the unvaccinated child. 25 times more often to the pediatrician if you're vaccinated, which is ironic because we all think vaccinations are supposed to prevent illness and fever, right? Not true. Vaccinated children are so much sicker than the unvaccinated. If you're unvaccinated, your lifetime chance of having a chronic illness is around 2%. If you're vaccinated, it's 60%. So this is what happened when they took away the medical exemption. This is the medical exemption process. I know it looks complicated because it is. And I'm just going to take you through it to show you what we're going to do about it. So the first stage of getting a medical exemption right now, according to the law, SB 276 in California, is you have to meet with a California-based medical doctor or a doctor of osteopathy. Those are the only two types of doctors who can write an exemption, and they have to be based in California. They write the exemptions under penalty of perjury, and if convicted, that has jail time. And they also write the exemptions under threat of losing their medical license. If they write more than 4 exemptions, they go under review. If they write a medical exemption for a school whose vaccination rates fall below 95%, and he's one of the doctors who wrote a medical exemption for any of those children, his medical license gets reviewed. And this is a trap. This is a Stasi snitch culture law right here. So what happens is most doctors then refuse. So most kids go this direction, path A, the doctor refuses to do it because those conditions are too onerous. And then the final outcome is they have to get all the vaccines to go to school, even if you're vaccine injured, homeschool, or leave the state. That's normally what happens. There's very few doctors who will write a medical exemption. And then what happens is they have to enter that exemption into an electronic database called CAIRME, CARE-ME, California Immunization Registry -- medical exemption. I call it the anti-vaxxer database. So not only does the family and the child's name go in the anti-vaxxer database, the physician's name goes in it too. Who wants to be in that database? No one. No one wants to be in that database. And then the exemption goes up to our very friendly Department of Public Health, who is just like us. No. They are so rabidly pro-vaccine, they overturn every single medical exemption that I've heard of, except for one. I've heard of one that got through and is based on a psychology condition of a child who is so fearful of getting vaccinations. It's the only one I know of that stood the test of the Department of Public Health. And then, so they usually deny it, and then they notify the parents and the school and the doctor that the medical exemption has been overturned by a Department of Health official who's never examined the child. There's one review process. You get 3 doctors to review your appeal, and if they deny it again, that's it. That is it. And then you go here again, final outcome, vaccination, homeschooling, or leaving the state. That's what life is like for parents in California who know about the dangers of vaccines or who have children who've already been injured by vaccines. And that cannot stand. Now, I just want to mention one other thing. Remember for school, I said that they're required to get more than 30 doses of 10 vaccines? If you go to your pediatrician in California, they use the school mandates as a battering ram to push a much bigger schedule. California is one of about 18 states that has tried to Trump-proof and Maha-proof their state from the changes in the CDC schedule. So your pediatrician, if you take your child there, is going to push 17 vaccines, including COVID shots, with 90 doses, telling you that your child has to have them for school. And right now, do we know that that's not true? Yes, that's not true. They don't have to have all those for school, but this is the schedule the pediatrician's going to push onto your child in California. Okay, I thought you were talking about hope and solutions today, Alex. What's up? Are you depressed right now? Okay, hold on. So, I've got really, really good news coming. First of all, religious exemptions are not legal in California. However, some religious schools are actually taking them. And there's a pastor named Ricardo Biaz. You can take a picture of this. He's at thenaturallawchurch.com. He'll help you with a religious exemption if you can determine in advance that your child's religious school will take a religious exemption. And most excitingly, it's possible, if not probable, that by this fall, California will regain the religious exemption. Yes. There's 4 religious exemption cases sitting at our Ninth Circuit Court right now, and luckily it's a 3-judge panel. 2 of those judges were appointed by conservative administrations, and only 1 was appointed by a liberal administration. So we're hoping that at least one of those 4 cases is going to be ruled in our favor, and then by this fall, it's possible we'll have the religious exemption back. So that's great news, right? So there's another way to go here in California. Guess what the law was silent on, this medical exemption law? The Americans with Disabilities Act. Why were they silent on that? Well, the ADA is a federal law. It's federal, and it's not subjected to state mandates. So this is what would happen with an ADA waiver. You meet with a doctor to evaluate you for an ADA disability, and a disability, according to the ADA now, since 2008, is defined as any condition that's lasted longer than 6 months. So it could be eczema, it could be asthma, it could be a sore knee. My wrinkles probably don't qualify because they've lasted longer than 6 months, but almost everything else might qualify. And once you get an ADA waiver from vaccination, it's HIPAA protected. The school, it's a don't ask, don't tell policy. The school can't ask what the disability is, and you don't have to tell. And so you get that from a doctor who evaluates you to see if your child qualifies. That doctor can be out of state because the ADA says you don't have to have a doctor in state to determine if you're disabled or not. It can be any doctor, even a doctor out of state. And then a lot of different kinds of doctors under the ADA can write an ADA waiver. And it doesn't go through the anti-vaxxer database. It goes straight to the school. And the ADA, unlike California's law, actually protects the physicians. So this is an incredible way forward. And there's a group pioneering this ADA waiver. It's called, take a picture of this, frontlinehealthadvocates.com. And they have a whole team there. They've got doctors experienced in evaluating for the ADA, and they've got lawyers to generate the letter that goes straight to the school, bypasses the anti-vaxxer database. There's 10 new ways to force a school to take it legally, so this was initially accepted pretty widely. There's thousands of them that have been accepted now at schools, mostly at private schools in California and even religious schools. And a religious school, hold on, side note, a religious school will say that they're not subjected to the ADA. And prima facie, if you look at the ADA, it does say that religious schools don't have to abide by the ADA, but that's not actually true. If that religious school accommodates any other disability like an EpiPen, they have to abide by the ADA. If they have an anti-discrimination policy written anywhere, they have to abide by the ADA. So there's a lot of ways to even force a religious school to abide by the ADA because they're already doing it. So Free Now Foundation, we have a case that would compel every school to accept the ADA waiver from vaccination. So we could get this type of medical exemption back in California very soon. My lawyers think in 2027 we might win. So that's really good news. And the legal question is, are schools exempt from the ADA? What do you say, yes or no? No, they're not. So that's this really simple legal question. How do you think a judge is going to rule in that? There's only one way. So, and then if we win that, then the parent could just say, no thank you to shots because I think they're going to harm my children. This is the future we want. We have another case called our due process case that would totally end mandates in California and beyond. Totally end mandates, in which case you wouldn't even need any exemptions. So we could get the religious exemption back, we could get this ADA waiver, but it wouldn't matter. If we win our due process case, then you wouldn't need exemptions anymore, and a parent could just say no. So our due process case is based on the 14th Amendment. Attorney General Bonta, our buddy, put our case on ice while the Ninth Circuit Court deliberates on those 4 religious exemption cases. So we have to wait until the Ninth Circuit has ruled on those religious exemption cases. And we expect to win this case this year or next year. And that, again, that would mean the end of vaccine mandates in California and beyond. So I know you're also thinking, Alex, I thought California was a lost cause. This is one of my final slides. The legal landscape here is definitely softening, and I put some detail here because it's a little bit detailed. The Supreme Court just affirmed the 14th Amendment right to direct the upbringing of your child in a case that was remanded back to our Ninth Circuit Court in California. That's really good. That's really, really good. Our due process case is based squarely on the 14th Amendment, so the court has been warned that they need to abide by the 14th Amendment. There was a Second Circuit case that just last week ruled against the Amish plaintiff, a guy named Miller, in a religious exemption case, so everybody thinks that's bad news, but that circuit court had all liberal judges, and they're likely to apply to the Supreme Court for cert petition, and we think the Supreme Court has been begging to take a case like this. In our cases and the religious exemption cases, there's conservative appointees. 2 of the 3 judges, as I mentioned earlier, are conservative. And then finally, another thing that's changing the legal landscape here is that Trump, a few weeks ago, explicitly affirmed parental authority and religious liberty in vaccination decisions with Executive Order 14407. You might want to take a picture of that. And this will act as persuasive authority in litigation. It's not going to twist the arm of the judges, but it acts as very persuasive authority while Trump is still in office. So let me just tell you, it is not time to give up in California. It is time to double down. We are using the courts to set the template for every blue state to get rid of their mandates and restore choice to parents around the entire country. Thank you. And our goal is to just make sure that parents can always call the shots and just say no thank you if they think vaccines would harm their children.